Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 41 of Daffy's Roundtable. On this episode, I'm joined once again by my good friend Jenn Haler, also known as JayhayJay. Today's episode is going to be a little different. Jenn and I discuss why newcomers to the hobby generally stick to species like ball pythons, leopard geckos, and cresties. We discuss why diversifying your keeping portfolio is important, and what we as breeders can do to create a shift into popularizing other species. But before we do that, allow me to give a huge shout out and thank you to Exoterra for continuing to sponsor this podcast and for making this episode possible. Exoterra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with Exoterra over the last few months, and I'm super excited for all the upcoming projects we have planned together. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the conversation with the Queen, JayhayJay. Jenn, you're back!
I'm back!
Hello!
It's great to be here again.
I'm very excited to have you back, and we have a very exciting episode planned, as usual. But
Yes.
I'm excited to talk about this topic. I think it's actually a topic more and more being discussed in the hobby now. And so before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to Project Herpetoculture. They had Billy Sven on, and he had his 10 tenants. And one of his tenants actually was that he wants to start. He only wants to bring in animals. I'm definitely going to phrase this wrong, but just basically my interpretation of it is he only wants to bring in animals that he knows he'll find homes for, but he also only wants to bring in animals that he believes are kind of sort of not worth breeding, but worth breeding because there isn't already a lot of people breeding them, and because there's like, just to take like crested geckos for example, there already is. If anybody's looking for a crested gecko, you're not going to struggle to find a crested gecko, right? But there are some species that you may struggle to find. And with more people paying more attention to them, we can hopefully make them more accessible. But then there's also the opposite of that, where because and you brought this point up as we were chatting earlier, because it's sort of what's known, it's what's kind of put into people's heads. So people will walk into a place and only ask for those specific species because they don't actually know. You take it from here. You know what I'm talking about.
Researching, like, okay, I want to get a reptile, so they'll start researching my first reptile, and like it just pops up, like those typical
top 10 best reptiles, or
they pop up, and that is based on what people particularly ask for, what they buy, what they see at expos and shows. It's not based on all of the hundreds and thousands of animals that are actually available. And so yeah, like there's these animals out there that are just kind of coming into the hobby or that don't have as big a demand yet that are so much better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What people want, they just don't know it yet because they haven't been exposed to it. So,
Agreed.
you know, when you're walking into a pet store and you're like, I'm looking for a leopard gecko, you know, that's what the pet store is going to bring in because that's what people are walking in asking.
That's what people are always asking for. That's what the demand is.
Yeah, but why are they asking for it? Because it was listed on my first, number one best first reptile. Whereas if people have the information of these other animals are being worked with, then realistically that might change, which is a good thing. Because at the end of the day, and I feel that way too as a breeder, I breed animals that I hope are going to make people happy, fit their needs, and live their entire lives with that person. Yes, animals do get rehomed sometimes, but the ideal is that it's going to be purchased and they're going to spend 15 years in that home and be enjoyed for those 15 years. And I honestly, in my opinion, don't believe that most of those like number one first reptiles actually aren't that animal.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I don't want to elude or jump too far ahead on what we're going to talk about, but like to give another example there, crested geckos, a lot of people always recommend them because of the rapashi. It's a reptile that doesn't eat bugs. It's blah, blah, blah. But how many other reptiles can you keep? Everything needs supplementation with bugs, not to say don't feed your reptiles bugs, but just like a crested gecko, there are things that, you don't have to keep a bug collection at home. You can go to the pet store, pick up the bugs, feed them that bugs, whatever often you need to.
And there's other animals that will more readily take worms or things that you can keep in the fridge or fruit flies that you can culture and that sound terrifying, but they're actually really simple because it's in a container on a shelf. Like, even just the feeder options that go with those animals are actually so much easier than the daily crickets.
Yeah, 100%. Before we go any further, what do you think of my hat?
Keep the straight face. Well, I do want to talk about frogs today, so it's topical.
I got my frog hat on. I'm ready.
It's a new look.
It's a new look. But no, actually, it makes it a little hard to hear. So I'm going to cut real quick.
He's back.
We're back. Okay. Got my usual hat on now. I can hear again. And let's get into it. So the way we're kind of going to do this is we're going to go through the list of the most common reptiles, or those top 10 lists that we spoke about earlier. Pick out those common reptiles and maybe suggest alternatives to those reptiles and why we think those are maybe not better, but other alternatives.
Yeah, I don't want to say don't get a leopard gecko. Like, I don't want don't get a ball python, or like, for a lot of people that is the animal they're going to love. I I want people to be aware that there's these other options that they should be, that are also available. You may have to look a little bit closer than your local pet store, or a little bit further than your local pet store, but it's worth it to know, because they might actually suit your needs better than what the top 10 list on the internet said. So nothing against leopard geckos, nothing against ball pythons and all the other typical ones, but maybe consider all the options so you're informed before you make a 15-year commitment.
Exactly. 100%. So since the first one you brought up was leopard geckos, let's go with leopard geckos. So again, not to say it, leopard geckos are awesome, but do you want to take the first suggestion?
Sure.
Actually? Yeah. So what do you think?
Personally, my first gecko was a leopard gecko, like absolutely, and I kept him for his whole life. I stuck it out.
I've never kept leopard geckos.
No, well, you're lucky. I stuck it out, but I never loved him. He never spoke to me the way I found him to be. A lot of work for what he was, and a little bit boring. And maybe part of that is just because they are so widely available, and because they're a single species that you can only keep them alone. You can't keep them communally. But for me, when I found viper geckos, I was like, this should be the leopard gecko. So viper geckos, which I'd kept, many years ago, and I'm now breeding again, are awesome because they don't have the impaction risk that a leopard gecko has. So a lot of people want to keep a leopard gecko on sand. They go into the pet store and then they're told either, yes, you can, and then they have impaction issues, or they're told in a good pet store, no, you can't. And then they go down the road of having to figure out alternative substrates, which are available, but just not as easy. So I love that viper geckos can be kept on sand. Like, it's you poop scoop. Like, it's like, it's a computer box. It's so easy. And like, every few months, you dump it out and put new sand in. You can rearrange it so easily. So I just find the sand makes life so much easier for them, and they don't have the impaction risk that leopard geckos have. So that's the first thing for them. Secondly, I find the communal aspect is huge. Like, huge. It's huge. I have a group of 6 together right now, and like, just watching their interactions, it's next level. Like, there's social behaviors that you never get to witness when you have a species you have to keep in singles. Like, you just don't get to, and it's really neat to watch. They do tend to all look similar, but they have a bit different personalities. And I think for a lot of people coming into their first reptile, they kind of want that. How often people come in going, I'm looking for 2 grass geckos, or I want 2 leopard geckos, 1 for each kid.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, all the time. Can I house this, or when can I bring him a friend? Or it's one of the most common asked questions. 100%.
Oh, the friend thing is always the question.
Yeah. He looks lonely.
Yeah, he's so lonely. No, he's just boring. But realistically, at the end of the day, it actually suits the needs better, because they do actually want 2 together, and this is a species that does well in a group. So I think that's a huge part of it, is being able to not kind of shame the customer for going, oh, but I wanted 2. No, you can't do that. Almost go, well, then here's other options. Here's another species you can look at. Another thing is, realistically, a leopard gecko, to have a like ideal happy life, needs a massive setup.
So that's one of the biggest ones, honestly.
People are coming in, buying a leopard gecko, thinking, I can keep it at 10 gallon. You can't. A leopard gecko, really, I think they're now saying 36 long is what they suggest as the ideal size.
I would say 40 plus, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. They use it. Who the hell's going to want to give a 40-inch setup to a leopard gecko that sleeps all day, isn't around? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it almost becomes a burden to people to either keep them in a tank that's too small their whole lives, or they do the big setup and then they get tired of it because they don't see it being used. It's not interesting enough for them. Whereas with viper geckos, like, I have a 24 long with a setup in it. Like, it's incredible. They're like in paradise. These things only get this big. So they're
huge for them.
It's huge. They climb, they go all over the place. Like, it's huge for them. Like, so you can really, and for a single viper gecko, if you put that in an 18 cube, like, they're set. Like, that's That's massive. Like even in a 12-12-12 for a single is possible. So I just find the setups are cheaper for people to get going on and just easier for them. They don't feel this need to have to properly set them up in this giant tank. And for most, parents setting up a kid with their first gecko, realistically, they don't want to buy a 36 or a 40-inch long tank. And you don't have to for a viper. I think the other major thing is they're so friendly, like out of the egg. I've posted pictures on my Instagram. They come out of the egg so docile. And I don't want to say leopard geckos aren't friendly. There's lots of friendly leopard geckos, but I've never met a viper gecko. You can't just reach in. And one of my reels, when I was talking about them, I was just reaching in, just trying to find one of the adults. And I'm like literally like reaching behind the piece of wood and just grab one and bring it out. Like it's that easy. Like they're so sweet, so tame. So for me, realistically, in terms of care, in terms of the size of the setup, in terms of personality and the ability to keep them communally, I honestly feel like most people coming in saying, I want a leopard gecko, what they actually probably want is a viper gecko. Or, I don't know.
Before we go to first of all, I 100% agree on two things. The communal thing is huge because you really do start to see behavior. And on the topic of behavior, do you find that there's a pecking order between the ones you're keeping in groups? Is there one that kind of like eats first? Is there any behavior
kept like one male? I've heard from some people, and I've raised males that I've purchased in groups together, and I've never actually had any issues. But I've only ever kept one male just because I'm trying to keep track of genetics. So I'm not sure if you put males in, but realistically, I haven't seen a pecking order. With with dart frogs and stuff, I definitely do, but I don't with these guys. They're so laid back. It's almost like they're stoned all the time. They're so laid back. At one point I was trying to keep track of like where they sleep and if they each have their own sleeping spot, but they don't. Like they
just alternate
up and alternate. And so I haven't really found that at all. I think they're just too laid back. Their natural defense is to smash themselves into a rock and keel their
knob tail kind of.
Yeah. So that's why they're called viper. It's actually not because they're vipers or anything. It's because they have the same type of scales that open up and kind of anchor themselves into the rock. That's their only defense is
and you can't get them out.
You can't get me. So they don't have a fast nature to run away. That's not in their instinct. Their instinct is literally just to go hide in a hole. So it makes sense that their personalities are laid back because they're not meant to run away. Whereas other species, that's in their instinct is to just get away from the predator. So I don't know. I find they're just really all just exactly the same. Very laid back, very friendly, and they all get along. And again, I haven't kept the males together, but I've never had an issue throwing a new female into the group, switching the females up when I'm switching my male breeders. It's no questions. Never. I don't even worry anymore because I've never had an issue.
That's awesome. Going back to another alternative that I am keeping that I think are incredible alternatives for leopard geckos, which again they're all the same things you just listed. They're communal, they're tiny, so small habitat, which is sort of a reoccurring theme that we've spoken about a bunch of times on the podcast already. People are moving into smaller spaces. People want smaller pets, and like you said earlier, an 18-18-18 is not a big tank. It's a small tank, but for such a tiny gecko, it makes a big difference. That would be keeping a viper in 18-18-18 would be like keeping a leopard gecko in something bigger than, or maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but keeping
I would say
like a 40 plus.
At least similar to that. I mean, a viper gecko is this big and a leopard gecko is this big.
Yeah, it's like triple the size, exactly.
More than it's my biggest vipers are maybe 15 grams max.
No, it's exactly. So Stenodactylus is the one I'm talking about, specifically Stenodactylus. I'm not sure if the second word is pronounced right. Those are the ones I'm keeping, but there's many different subspecies. There's Durae, there's Petrii, there's all of them. I haven't kept them all, but from my research, they all seem to be kind of the same thing. They're communal. They're some of them are a little bit bigger, some of them are a little bit smaller, but then to go to the behavior thing, it does seem like there is sort of a hierarchy or pecking order in the because I'm keeping big groups too.
That's a fun thing to witness in terms of their social behavior.
100%. There's the big king male. There's the younger males that the big male is guarding the females he wants, and then it's kind of like
keep males together with.
I have them. So I have 3 groups of them now.
Okay.
And I have multiple males and multiple females in each group. And
That's crazy.
so I want to separate them into smaller groups now and kind of make them like trios, males and females alone. But I kind of want to do this the whole experiment thing. We're keeping a couple of males together and keeping, because they're definitely, like you said, there's no aggression in any way. Like there's never fighting, never, but they're just kind of like you were saying. They sleep in different places and they're always alternating. No, my male knows this is his spot.
Don't touch.
His females are around him. He has that's his hide, and generally he'll let everyone into his hide. But or like, again, maybe I'm imagining all this, but it's the other two males. So when I had them, so I've taken one male out, so now it's just the two males. But when I had all three together, the other two males were in separate hides with each like one female, and then the male, the little bedrooms, because it was a very long tank with just a bunch of different hides everywhere.
Bed.
Yes, I'm sure he has that inside, sand heart-shaped bed. But yeah, so it's interesting. They're a lot of fun, and then the even cooler thing, which I think something the vipers do as well, is the tail wiggle.
Yes.
Right, something you can, and I think leopard geckos, I've never kept them. I think they'll do it as well. But the Stenodactylus are like, it's every meal you see it, and which, coming to meal, they are nocturnal animals. But if I throw crickets in at any point of the day, they come running out. They're
my lights go off at 7. I usually feed around 2 or 3. And they're all out eating, like it's immediate. They sleep out in the open. I find they don't hide as much as like a leopard gecko would in a cage. So I find that they're all waiting for it, which is really interesting. I also find when you mentioned tails, have you had any tail drops on them? Because I've had none.
So I've never had it happen.
Yeah.
The big male I'm talking about, when I originally purchased him, had already come with a regrown tail. So I know it's possible, and I know they regrow it, and I know it looks a little different. But I've never had any of them lose their tail.
And vipers must be able to lose it because of their natural defense mechanisms. But I've never, maybe they regrow it the same, and I just didn't notice. But I'd never worry the way I do with a leopard gecko. I find every time a leopard gecko is moving its tail, I know it's being defensive, so I worry that it's going to drop the tail. Whereas with the vipers, I never worry about that. And for a lot of people buying their first reptile, tail drop is traumatic.
Oh yeah,
it's something they definitely want to avoid completely. So an animal that's less likely to drop its tail is appealing, I think, for a lot of first-time reptile owners.
100%. I will reach in there with pick up a hide with like 3 or 4 under there and grab one of them, and no, it's grab. No, I don't grab my animals. Don't grab your animals. Like, pick up your animal. You gently pick up your animal. And
I grabbed.
Yeah. And no, it's never been a thing for me as well. I wonder though, that is a very interesting point, because the tail is differently shaped, right? Like the Stenodactylus tail is like most, it's
long.
It's a long straight tail, where the
viper,
another name, kind of like a club shaped.
Yeah, carrot or turnip tail gecko is another name, or carrot tail gecko, because it's kind of like kind of fat. Yeah. So, but again, I've never worried, and I've had lots of them come through now, and zero concerns, never had a loss. And I literally, if I have little kids coming over, because I have 4 kids, and so I'll often have their friends come over, that's like, they want to hold something cute and small, that's what I grab. That's what I grab as a viper, because it's
not jumpy like a baby crestie.
Yeah, it's easy. It seeks out the warmth of the hand still, because it's a heat-seeking animal, and I just know it's going to sit there, crawl around, and then go back.
So 100%. And then one more that I'm going to put in there, although after speaking about those two, speaking about the vipers and speaking about the Stenodactylus, it's kind of gone down in the list of to be fair with it, because it's not as small.
Yeah.
They're not communal. And so far, I have 3 of them. So far, all 3 of them don't really want, and I keep trying, I'll go in, I'll tongue feed them. And the female sort of come up to me, but the male wants nothing to do with me. So they kind of lose points on all those 3 aspects. But Pictus geckos, Periodora picta, are another great one. I'm enjoying keeping mine. I like I said, not the most in terms of handleable, but they're out, they're chilling, they're good eaters. There's a lot of advantages to them as well.
It's interesting, because when I got my first gecko 20 years ago, and it was a leopard, I remember going into the store and they had a pictus there.
Okay.
Which is strange, because it wasn't a common gecko.
Yeah.
And I remember the salesperson telling me, "Don't get this one; it's way harder."
Was that the pictus?
Yeah. And then in the years since, obviously, I've learned that they're not way harder. So I almost wonder if there's something that haven't grown in popularity just because of a preconceived notion that they're harder than a leopard gecko, when realistically they're more fun to watch, I would imagine, than a leopard gecko is. They're more active.
Again, I've never kept leopard geckos, but they are fun to watch.
Yeah.
They're like, I've heard of a lot of people having like, again, like from the store, people will come and be like, my leopard gecko isn't eating, that kind of thing, you know. And I've like, Pictus will eat. They'll eat every time.
You put them on sand?
They're on sand. Mine are on sand. So
I almost wonder with leopard geckos, have we just like inbred them to the point now where they're more prone to compaction? Like, why are they?
So you brought this up a number of times, and I like it's a very controversial topic. I don't believe that leopard geckos, that the reason leopard geckos are, and I know a lot of people are sharing this opinion, but it's a very controversial topic. I don't believe that leopard geckos are getting impacted because it's sand. Or my opinion, which again,
caveat,
you know, like quotation points, like disclaimers, don't listen to me. Like, I don't keep leopard geckos, but and I believe that this is any animal. So I think that a pictus and a leopard gecko and a stenodactylus and a viper and all of them are just as likely to get impacted, because the impaction happens from poor husbandry, and an unhealthy animal is what's getting impacted.
Mm-hmm.
And then people are just blaming it on sand, because they don't want to admit that they weren't keeping the animal warm enough. They weren't keeping.
And that makes sense, because if it's we would say, well, why does that happen so often with leopard geckos? Because they're more popular. They're often a first reptile.
They're kept by beginners. They're kept by more people that are likely to make these mistakes.
That is, they're throwing a little 20-watt bulb on it, and so it makes sense that you would see all of the X-rays online of impaction just out of that. Whereas if you're getting an animal like a pictus or a viper, because you've decided that's better, even for your first reptile, you've done more research. So you know that you need the right heat. You know, you need a thermostat. You know, you need all these things. So you probably
had
on sand.
So sorry, that cut out. Can you say that again?
You probably could have kept a leopard gecko on sand as well successfully once you've done that research. But you probably wouldn't have chose a leopard gecko once you did that research.
So I actually know a lot of leopard gecko enthusiasts that love their leopard geckos, and they're advanced keepers, and a lot of them are keeping leopard geckos on sand successfully. And they've never had a problem.
I feel like in this industry, we're almost afraid to say it. We're almost afraid to go against the grain.
We are. It's every single person that I've spoken to that's done it successfully for a very long time told me, secretly, and told me, don't put this on Facebook, don't say it in the groups, don't say it, like, you know.
I mentioned this in our last episode, but also when I was doing crested geckos 15 years ago, I was doing bioactive, and everyone was like, ooh, bacteria, you're not changing out the soil. Have things on them. And everyone was saying paper towel only and yada, 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 or cocoa fiber, and you change it out every 2 weeks. So, and it was kind of like, now it's the standard for a crested gecko. So it's like, I think we need to talk about these things and say, hey,
bring them out.
I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this. It's successful, but here's why.
Like, 100%. So I had, and I've mentioned this a couple of times already, and the episode is there. It's my episode with Supreme Gecko Wally Curran. Mm-hmm. So I know, I sort of, that was the first time I brought it up on the podcast, and I asked him, and he gave me an incredible answer. So I'm going to give a quick summary of it just because we're on the topic, and just in case people haven't heard that one. He said that in nature and in the wild, these animals are getting their calcium and their minerals and all these things from licking stones and licking rocks and picking up different things, and they're licking their environment all the time. We're keeping them. Yeah, me too as well. Yeah. Jen's just out there in her backyard licking everything.
Just licking trees.
Yes. So we're not really giving them that ability, but if we give them natural sources, but if we give them, so he and even that, like, I'm not convinced that just giving them a bowl of calcium is going to do the trick. But it's better than nothing.
Cuddle is something I've started hearing about putting
limestone is natural sources of things like that. So if you were truly to build some incredible bioactive build, so maybe not bioactive, again, the debated controversial word, naturalistic arid build with all these different types of rocks and grasses and
natural
things.
Elements of their.
What are the odds that they'd actually get impacted? I think pretty low.
But I think you're right, like, just in terms of the right heat source, like, I know it sounds simple, but for the average first reptile owner, they don't have their heat down. They just don't. Like, they're, you know, especially when you're buying it.
And like I said, a lot of people will come into the store and say my animal's not eating, and this is a thing in leopard geckos, in ball pythons, in crested geckos. In crested geckos, it's specifically, it's crested geckos and gargoyle geckos. It's specifically I can't get my gecko to eat insects, and it's always, always, always what temperature you're keeping them out. Raise it a degree or two, and boom, they start eating. So it is.
And the natural cycles, the winter and summer, like we're not teaching new owners, like that matters too.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. When your air conditioning comes on and your air gets drier, or your heater comes on there or whatever, and the air gets drier, and you have to start spraying more often for human species. That's something that's not convinced.
Yeah.
And here's another one for you. No, sorry, go ahead.
When your timers are set for 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day,
and you got to reduce them for winter.
Year, and people don't realize, oh, wait a second, it's dark outside.
Yeah, like maybe reduce your hours a couple of one. Here's another one for you. And this is like a very interesting topic that I'm starting to play with. I think about water versus humidity. And it's talked about a lot with dart frogs of like they want it humid but not wet. But I'm not even thinking that. I'm thinking like we're spraying them with water, with like maybe freezing cold room temperature water at this point. Are we really raising their humidity, or are we just freezing them? Like, what are we doing here? So it's these small details, I think, make a difference in husbandry and the health of the animal.
Spray, like a mist king mist versus a spray versus adding water to the drainage layer. Like these are all different types of humidity that are different. Like I have a sulcata tortoise. And one of the most difficult things is they're from Africa. It's hot, but they need humidity because they burrow down 10 feet.
Yes.
So reproducing that, and then people go and put humidifiers on them, and then they get shell rot. And it's like, yeah, but reproducing that right type of humidity, that's complicated. And
so how are you doing it?
Right now, I'm working with giving her a hide that has cocoa husk and everything in it that she can basically go sit on the soil, because what she needs is soil or like a substrate that is going to give natural humidity around her shell that she can leave, the same way she'd leave her burrow. So I can't dry out. So she needs literally, I mean, her enclosure is 8 feet by 8 feet, but she literally needs to be able to go under the heat lamp, get 100 degrees, and then be able to go to 70 degrees and be on the damp soil the way she would be if she was going down into her. But if you make your whole enclosure 80% humidity, because they need humidity, they get hot. So it's complicated, and it takes a lot of research beyond that first day. But I think we're off topic.
Yeah, we are. Sorry, tangents. No, but you know what? That was all very, very, very interesting. I think.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so those
don't kind of tangents are good tangents. I'm not recommending sulcata tortoise. No.
Those are not okay. So before we jump, yes, sulcata tortoises are not replacements for leopard geckos at all. But is there a tortoise that you would recommend?
No. There really isn't. And again, I love tortoises. I love turtles. I have my sulcata. She's 20 something pounds, and she was a rescue. I would never in a million years have gone out and purchased a tortoise. In my mind, going with a smaller species is obviously the smartest thing to do. So going with something like,
I have one recommendation.
The Egyptian. But they're expensive. They're $2,000
and very hard to find.
Very hard to find. And it's I think realistically, especially because we're talking about like top 10 first pet, nobody should be getting a turtle or a tortoise for their first reptile, I guess.
Right.
Thought. Yeah. I've been keeping reptiles for 20 years. I feel ready for a tortoise now. Like basically, if you have been doing this for a year or two, and again, there's exceptions to the rules. There's people that have got a tortoise and have these incredible outdoor enclosures and winter enclosures and are doing it better than I feed my dog. Like realistically, there's always exceptions. But if you're thinking I want a reptile, get a tortoise, we're talking 60 to 100 years. We're talking about even smaller tortoises. Like the amount, like Stella can go 5-6K in a day. Like, I'm not joking, 5 or 6 kilometers she can travel in a day. Believe me, I know, because she's got my yard and ended up like she needs a GPS tracker in the summer. So
you should actually like glue an air tag to her shell. Okay, maybe not glue. I don't know how the best way to do it.
I will. Yeah. But realistically, I personally don't believe that they're animals that the average person could say, yes, for the next 60 years, this is something I'm here for, and I'm going to be able to dedicate an entire room of my house to this. And unless you've been doing this long enough that you know that you're really weird and that you're like us and you eat and breathe this. And that's honestly why I have her right now, is because I know that this is me. And And I'm realistically, I have 1,000 square foot basement that I will dedicate to her. But again, even Egyptians, even the ones that say smaller, like this is not like, oh, I can keep it in a 4-foot enclosure then. No, it doesn't work that way. They still need, the average person doesn't have a room they can dedicate, doesn't have an acre of property they can dedicate. So to me, there is no box turtles. Maybe they're not quite as active as most tortoises are. And they're also an more arid species and stay quite a bit smaller. But again, I would love to know the statistics on how many tortoises are in their original homes. And I'm in a lot of tortoise groups, and there's not very many. They're just, I'm Stella's 3rd or 4th home, like, and she's 15. So I hope I'm her last, unless I find some amazing sanctuary for her. But I just personally, if you're looking for your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, even 5th reptile, don't fall into the like, ooh, the tortoise craze. Like, do you own a house with a room that is going to be theirs for the rest of their lives and a backyard that you are going to dedicate to them for the rest of your life? If the answer is no for both of those things, don't do it.
Don't do it. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I've kept turtles. I've never kept tortoises, so I don't really have an opinion on it. Mm-hmm. But and I don't have a statistical number for you. I know. So I used to work in a red-eared slider rescue. So first of all, let me say that the fact that there is a red-eared slider rescue should say enough. The fact that there were pretty much a whole operation just enough to rescue red-eared sliders is enough said. But there was about 4 or 5 emails a day asking for rehomes and about 1 request for adoption a month. Yeah. So if you do the math there, it's pretty scary.
Because it's so, a tiny turtle or a tiny tortoise is adorable. Mm-hmm. It's adorable. Like, and it's easy to care for in terms of the size of the tank and the size of the enclosure. The sulcutas are this big when they're born. And then they're 100+ pounds at 20 years old, typically. Like, Stella is dwarfed for her age because of her care. Yeah. Like, realistically, and we're not, the other thing people don't think about, like, do you know how much poop and pee, you've seen it.
and how much it costs to feed too.
Oh, we're talking like $50 a week. Yeah, like it's not cheap. Like it's expensive and it's a mess. Like Stella has to wear an adult diaper. I mean, she hasn't peed in a couple of days because it's a lake. Again, you've seen it. Like,
I have. Yes.
Like when I clean her enclosure out, I have to broom and spray. Like, it's like being in a zoo. It's the next level. It's a zoo level. Yeah. And again, there's people who do keep large monitors successfully and tegus and stuff like that successfully. And like, to me, that's the level you're at. It's when you're doing this, but we're talking about a lifespan that you will have to will this animal to your children. Like,
and that's the big one. That's the big one.
That's the big one. And I see sulcutas, they're back on all the wholesale lists now.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's trends. It's up and down, right? They've come.
People wanted Egyptians for a long time and now they're back to sulcutas because they get so big. But
yes. So I will say, I've never kept, but from what I've been hearing from a lot of people, the Egyptians are actually the only one that are actually possible to keep in captivity, and you can do in like a smaller space. Again, not a small space. You still need like a tortoise table and all that, but because they only get to about like 4 or 5 inches, I think, max, like maybe even less than that. But moving on, because I don't know enough about tortoises to discuss this. Maybe we should do a tortoise episode.
We should.
But, yeah. Okay, so moving on from that.
We bashed leopard geckos enough now.
Leopard geckos enough now. Ball pythons?
So ball pythons are interesting to me. I've only ever had one that came in as a rescue. And
I remember.
And I mean, I'll be honest, my issue with ball pythons are the little nose vents.
You don't like it?
Can't handle the little nose vents.
Okay. So that's a python thing, and I actually really like it. But
yeah, so aesthetically they don't speak to me. But my biggest issue with ball pythons, I mean, they were the original snake, right? And it's fascinating reading papers and stuff from the original OG keepers who were literally going out there and finding them. When you look at the genetics they were able to, like what we do with leopards, what we do with cresties, what we do with most species, that all came from the foundations of ball python breeders. So I don't want to ever knock the OG ball python people, because realistically a lot of our hobby has grown from that, and you have to have a certain amount of respect for that. But like you and I go to the shows together and we're walking through, and neither of us are ball python people, so we're always just kind of like skip. And I get it. There's people who love them, who collect them, who like it is like we know people who just that is their passion pet, and that's great. But for the average first reptile person who Googles my first pet snake, ball python comes up. And what they are not thinking, and it's similar to a beardy in that what they're not thinking is there is no cage on the market, easily accessible on the market, that is big enough for a ball python. There isn't.
Shout out Beneath the Canopy.
Yes, well, exactly. But that's what you're doing. You're having to contact people like Beneath the Canopy to have a custom cage made. And we're talking about a huge, and you don't realize that when you're buying your little, 65-gram hatchling, and they're easy to breed. So they're very available. Realistically, a normal ball python is what you can get them for $20. Like, they hatch in large clutches. They're not hard to breed. And so at the end of the day, you end up with these snakes that, I mean, as much as crested geckos are being overbred, they can live in an 18-24. So a ball python, all of these babies, they're not getting 6-7 foot enclosures like they need for an adult. An adult ball python is massive. It's huge. Massive. And they're active. They're climbers. They don't just need the length, they need the height. They need to be able to be let out and let around your house to get exercise. And I don't think people are thinking that necessarily. Like, this is a snake that, very much like a tortoise, is going to almost need, I know, like, some of the best ball python keepers have parrot setups, like with the big branches for them to climb on. Like, they take them outside. Like, that's really what they need to live an actual and fulfilling life. So to me, the average person looking for their first snake, they don't want something that big. They really don't. And they're going to be kept in a 20 or 30 gallon tank, which is too small. And then they're going to have issues with them not eating. Like you said, how many people come in and go, it's not eating. And it's like, there's a whole bunch of factors at play here. And husbandry. It's probably multiple factors of your husbandry. And then they end up on Kijiji, or realistically, they end up dead. I would love, again, no statistics on how long the average ball python is actually living. I think a lot of them are just going 5-6 years and then they pass on. And that's, oh, well, my snake died of old age. No, we rewrote what the lifespan is.
For real. So funny enough, the other rescue I worked at was not a ball python rescue. It was all reptiles rescue. And I was just kind of getting some, just some experience with working with reptiles there. And obviously, like, this probably goes without saying, but the most common reptile to enter that rescue was ball pythons.
Ball python.
All the time, almost daily. It was crazy.
Because, again, who wants a snake that big, that girthy? Like, we're talking like and with all of the things that go along with that, the average person is not looking for that, and they're buying it for their kid, and they're gonna get tired of it. They're the pet rock. Like, realistically, what does a ball python do? It's a ball. That's why they're called that. They don't do a whole lot. And so I think for the average person, they think they want their first snake. They go with ball python because it's been said to them, and it's not actually what they're looking for. To me, what they're looking for is...
Before you tell us that, I stopped you there. I'm sorry. Before you tell us that, just to touch on that one more time. Actually, before we touch on that, I want to get a parrot cage and put a bunch of branches in it and put it outside for my mountain horn dragons this summer. I'm so excited to do that. Dragons, I think it's going to be awesome.
For Taz.
And for Taz, actually, that would be sick too. I'm sure he'd love it as well.
A lot of people do neat things with the cat condos.
Yes.
Like, you can have them set up year round outside and let
build them a catio.
Experience that. Yeah, I think it's a lot of species benefit from that.
Clearly, we can't do outside here year round, but at least for a couple of months in summer, it would be awesome. But on the ball python thing, it's not that I think that they're a bad snake. No. I think they're an awesome snake, but I don't think that they are the beginner snake. I do think that they do require, like you said, it's very, very, very common, almost too common, hearing they don't eat. It doesn't move. A snake, like, yes, they are ball pythons, and yes, they don't move, and yes, that's their thing, but even ball pythons should eventually move around and climb at night and do their thing. And I don't think that a beginner keeper has the skill to actually properly care for a ball python. It's just they're hardy.
And humidity. They need heat and humidity. That's the other thing. Why are we recommending a snake that needs heat and humidity?
I'll tell you why. Because they're hardy, which again is the same thing as leopard geckos. They're hardy, so anybody can keep them alive. Doesn't mean that they're doing it right. For 5 years, for 10 years, doesn't mean that they're doing it right just because the animal's alive. And this is something that they've spoken about on multiple podcasts as well. And it's so true. It's the animal is surviving, not thriving.
Yeah, it's hiding, it's suffering, so you think it's all fine. So now can I say my replacement?
Now you can tell. I wanted to build it up a little more. Okay, now tell us.
So as someone who doesn't like snakes, I'm not a snake person. And my daughter wanted her first snake. You know, I told you never. My daughter wanted a snake. And so we went out and we did all the research. Because that's what, you know, I'm Googling first snake for a kid. And it's ball python, it's corn snake, it's this and that. And then because we did the research and talked to breeders, we found sand boas. And I was like, literally, this is what we actually want. They are tame, handleable. They don't bite, and when they do, it's nothing. And they're small. They're small. An adult male is like this. My biggest females are like 1,000 grams, like that max. You know, you can keep an adult male very happily in something that is 24 inches long. An adult female needs a bit more, but again, like these are tanks you can readily purchase on the market, which again, when you're buying my first reptile, it needs to be something you can go into a pet store and pick off a shelf, because that is really the what you can expect of the average person buying their first pet. Like they're not going to contact someone for a custom cage unless they've invested later on. So to me, the size of a sand boa, the personality, and the fact that you don't have to balance humidity and heat. Like that to me was huge. I don't have to ask my 9-year-old to spray down the cage every day, but also keep it warm enough at the same time. And I don't have to worry about scale rot the same way. I don't have to worry about those things because they're an arid species. They just need the heat. Yes, they sometimes need a bit of help with shedding. They can take baths for shedding, but then you dry them off and put them in, they're fine. Like,
do you ever spray them?
I don't spray them, but I do bathe. Especially the hatchlings, I often bathe them about once every couple of weeks. And they'll swim in the water and such, and then all the shed comes off. But again, like literally, I probably have to give the babies 5 or 6 baths total as they're growing, and then that's it. Adults, never. I never have issues. They will go through their water bowl as needed if they need it for shed, but they just don't have the shed issues that other snakes have because they're made to be in hot and dry, which is easy to keep. A hot, dry snake, you can literally leave for the week, feed it on Saturday, make sure it has water, and let the thermostat do the rest, which is what the average parent is looking for when they're buying their kid their first snake. The males especially are what I recommend because they stay so much smaller. To me, that is the ideal first snake. It's foolproof in a lot of ways. And again, putting it in you want to do a 36 long for an adult female. Like I've shown you pictures of Dot and her big one when she had all the climbing branches and like they use it, but that's easy to do comparative to a 36 long is not big enough for a ball python. Like realistically,
they use it. You see yours?
Oh yeah, at night they definitely use them. It's funny because I'm sitting in front of my sand boas right now, and they're all out and about, and they're all like they're at night they are active. And the other thing too is because they don't really bite and they burrow. During the day when you want to hold them, you just go dig through the sand and then you pick them up. Like it's easy. It's always easy to find them. You're not having to like open up their hide and then like uncurl them. And because they also like high heat, they're heat seeking. So they're happy to go into your, like sit in your shirt or on your hand and just hang out. So to me, again, I haven't had a lot of experience with things like corn snakes and such, but again, the size, it's so much bigger than an adult sand boa. I just think to me, when it comes to snake, size is really important for your first snake, not getting into, and we're even talking about the food. Like my adult females still eat small mice or small rats. That's the biggest size they eat. Like you're not buying these colossal rats. You're not like the poop is smaller. It's like dogs, small poop, big dog, big poop. Like everything is just easier to me, which is what you should be thinking of when you're getting your first reptile. Do you agree? Do you have a different opinion?
No, I 100% agree. So I do have a different opinion. I'll tell you why in a second. I agree. It's funny because Taz is only like, so Taz is my carpet python for everyone listening that doesn't know. He's only like 2 years old and he's already eating small mice. So I can only imagine what he's going to eat when he's larger and how big those poops are going to be.
Dot is 8 years old and she's eating smalls.
She's eating smalls. That's crazy. Yeah. So
for a sand boa.
Yes, I have seen Dot, and she's bigger than. She's probably the biggest sand boa I've ever seen. I've seen a bunch of different females, and none of them have ever been the size of Dot. So that's it's interesting. She's massive. So I 100% agree. I think sand boas are awesome. I've never kept them, but I really enjoy working with the ones that you bring into Critter Jungle, and they're a lot of fun. They're a cool species, but
I knew that
for
was coming.
me, as of course, I love all snakes. I love colubrids. I think they're very interesting. I would love king snakes at one point. Like, I enjoy it. But for me, I think when I think snake, I think pythons. I love pythons. And like that's just what I'm into. So for anybody who is like me, so sand boas are a great option
They're
as that.
sand beetles. They have cartoon faces. When you want a snake that looks imposing.
When you want a snake that looks imposing, there you go. That's the right thing. Anything, I would say anything from the genus Antaresia. Okay. So children's pythons, things like that. They're essentially a dwarf python, like a much smaller carpet python. So they generally eat well. Like you said, they don't need those massive setups that the ball python has. Go as big as you can because they will use it as much. Like they will climb up and they will use every corner of that enclosure. But they don't need, like, for them, it's going back to the vipers versus the leopard geckos. For them, a really big tank is something manageable, whereas for a ball python, something where you're spoiling them, it's custom, it's bigger, so anything from the genus Antaresia, I'll put there as a great, I think, a great beginner snake. And again, disclaimer, if anybody thinks I'm wrong, let me know. But I think they would be a pretty good.
Well, I'd like to see in the comments, or if anybody recommends another, because we don't keep a ton of different species of snakes ourselves. So I'd love to know what else we should be recommending. It's interesting. I don't want to, I think we're going to move on from snakes now anyways, but yes. I just want to do a little aside because I don't think it needs a whole segment. But we mentioned bearded dragons earlier, and then you said dwarf python. It makes me think of bearded dragons, same issue as ball pythons, right? They're what people suggest. And at the end of the day, what they really want is Rankin's dragons,
or collared lizards.
Or collared lizards. So these are two other species, because I have kept beardeds in the past. And again, I had 6-foot enclosures and they weren't big enough. It was 6-foot custom enclosure and it was not big enough.
Nope.
And I see these babies at pet stores and and they're $99 and they're recommended.
Too easy too cheap, too easy to set up.
Too cheap, and they're easy and they're big. They're like a dog. It's great. And puppy dog of reptiles. And I just think to myself again, like, what are you getting yourself into? And so
wait a year and find out.
Exactly. And the cost of feeding them, like, we're talking daily live food, multiple options, as well as vegetables. Like, it's complicated. So for me, because my kids again wanted bearded dragons, and I'm like, no, we're not doing this because I know I'm not going to dedicate a room to a bearded dragon. We did a bunch of research because we're in the industry and we know to do that, and got Rankins, which are basically dwarf bearded dragons. So they look like bearded dragons, but they're this big. Yeah. So a 36 or 48 long for them. And again, they're a more communal species, so you can keep them in multiples. And I didn't know that. Yeah, so that's another awesome thing. And then from there, we got the collared lizards, which I've just got into, which I think are going to be the next big, like, I hope they're going to be the next big thing.
So by the time this episode's out, my episode with Top Shelf Gecko, James from Top Shelf Gecko, will already be out.
Well, I'm excited.
It's mostly about collared lizards. Go check them out. I think, so I met him at the expo, and he showed me those collared lizards, and almost immediately I was like, you got to come on the podcast to talk about them because I found them fascinating. I agree with you. I think they're going to be a lot more popular.
When you saw me when I got my pair, it was
I remember.
And I bought them, and I don't typically impulse outside of what I'm already working with. And I was hyperventilating when I saw you because I was like, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. But literally, I fell for them because they were blue, like the colors, and the personality is like a bearded dragon. Like, I say a little bit faster than a bearded dragon, but also because of that, they're way more interesting to watch.
But that's one of the nice things, exactly. Yeah.
Because I mean, realistically, you're not holding your pet 24 hours a day. You're walking past the enclosure, and
which is what I love about the emerald tree skinks, is how active they are.
You have these are still, even the handleable species are still a viewing pet, and so you need to keep that in mind. So just on that little aside of bearded dragons, I really think collared lizards, absolutely, and Rankins. And Rankins they're just not as popular. They're not as easy to get right now. That is what I would love to see in every pet shop, instead of bearded dragons, because realistically, that is something that the average person can still purchase their first reptile and get that bearded dragon personality without any of the issues. And for people who want a bit more activity, the collared lizard, I hope to see more and more. So we'll see whether that happens.
Okay, so going back to our list, The next one, and one of the first one we brought up is even as an example, and one of the most common ones, and I do still, and I know you do as well, recommend crested geckos as one of the best beginner pets, but we have some other recommendations for you.
Yeah, and I keep. I mean, that was my passion pet. I mean, I say there's people who are just ball pythons. That's what they love, and to me, I don't care where the market is for crested geckos. I love them. I will always love them. I will always keep them. I'll always breed them on whatever scale I'm at that time. So to me, like, I'm not bashing crested geckos. They're wonderful, wonderful pets. I'm just, again, thinking of what are the other options. There are other options. So again, a crested gecko, an adult crested gecko, should be in an 18, 24 minimum. There's people that keep them in, even bigger than that. They use the space. They're active. They're out and about. I think I mentioned in the last episode that I used to have an 8-foot tall enclosure with multiples in it. And like, they used it. It was incredible to watch. So at the end of the day, going back to what we were saying earlier about vipers and stuff, that when you can provide that huge space to something smaller, then you're providing them the best life. To me, the alternative is your dactylides or your dactylides, depending on how you say it. So, or chameleon geckos.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or common name chameleon geckos.
Yeah, or whatever. Bowers, I think, is another one that they.
Bowers. Yeah. That's true.
So these are also New Caledonian species. They've been gaining more popularity over the last few years. There's 4 types that are now, I think, circling in the pet trade. 2 are
like 4 subspecies.
Yeah. 2 are more common to get now. But literally, we're talking about a gecko that is tamer than a crested gecko. So again, baby Urodactylides remind me a lot of vipers out of the egg. Like, I have, again, on my Instagram, like a baby on a Q-tip, which shows A, how tiny they are when they're born, and B, how tame they are. So this is not. And I remember reading an article at one point about where they live in the canopy in New Caledonia, and basically like how their whole evolution is based on just hiding in the bark. Like, they're not running away from their prey. They're hiding in the bark. That's basically what they're doing. They have way less tail drop because of that, because it's not the same idea of like when you're a larger animal, you're more visible, whereas these guys are an adult's only this big and they're darker in color typically. And so in terms of how they hide from their predators, it just makes them calmer, I think, overall in their personality. I've never had a Urodactylide that was crazy. I've never had one that I can't just reach in and grab. They are very similar to vipers to me. They're just like the arboreal version of a viper to me. Adult size is small. So someone coming in looking to get a 12, 18 with a crested gecko for their kid, yes, your gecko can live in that. Will it thrive in that? Probably not. Look at getting a Urodactylide, because this is something much smaller, less chance of tail drop, and can live so happily in that setup. Very similar diet to the crested gecko. They eat crested gecko or other manufactured diets. I find it interesting for, like, there's none of my crested geckos I don't feed live food to. I think it's essential to their diet. And again, that can be up for debate.
So you do feed them live food?
All my crested geckos get live food.
Okay.
All of them. I think it's essential. I have a lot of Urodactylides that refuse live food. They don't want it. So I almost wonder, and I mix in a higher protein mix for the crested geckos typically in their diet. But I almost wonder, like, I feel comfortable selling a Urodactylide to someone saying you don't have to feed live food. Whereas a crested gecko, I always worry a bit, because I do feel like you should for a crested gecko. So again, it's up for debate. Everyone has their own opinions on that. But this is a gecko I feel fully confident leaving, sending off to a first gecko home, knowing that they're just going to feed the crested gecko diet, and that's that. The other thing with the Urodactylides is that they need a dry out period. So different from the crested geckos, and it's actually what termed them as difficult at first, was that people were having issues with them just dying and having from too much humidity, and they weren't realizing that's what it was. So at the end of the day, they need the tank to drop down even to like 30% before it goes back up, which sounds more complicated, but for the average person keeping their first pet, they're not in there spraying.
That's actually easier.
It's easier that they need that dry out period. None of my Urodactylides are on the misting system. None of them are on the misting system, because there's actually times where I'll go a whole day without misting. Like, I let them dry out first and then I mist. So you almost see, if you over mist them, their skin almost gets like, it looks weird. Like, it almost gets this translucency to the top layer. Like, they definitely need a dryer, which is, again, easier for the first time reptile keeper because they're not in there spraying all the time. So I feel like overall I don't want to say they withstand a little bit of neglect, but the neglect is almost necessary for them in order
They thrive on neglect.
Yeah, they do.
Like tarantulas.
Yes, like tarantulas. And basically, you don't handle a crestie for 4 or 5 weeks, it gets more wild. You don't handle a urodactylide for 4 or 5 weeks, it's the exact same as it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. Like, they don't become crazy the same way. So again, I just think they're just not as available. There's still a lot of pet stores that don't even know what they are. You don't see them on any wholesale lists yet. For a while, they were very expensive. They were like $350 each. They've come down now closer to 200. I think there's more people really starting to work with them. So I'm really hoping we're going to see an explosion of this in the pet store trade, in the hopes. And again, pet stores tend to get scared about selling smaller animals to people because it's like, if it's smaller, it's
more fragile, which isn't necessarily true.
It's not necessarily true. Like, I really hope that, we're able to change that a bit in the industry and see that smaller actually means more manageable. It means that, in some cases actually tamer, and in a lot of cases way easier to provide an incredible home for.
And imagine a pair of urodactylides, or however you say it, in an 18-18-24.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
imagine them using all that and all the escaping you can do with it and everything you can put into it, where, like, as opposed to a crestie in 18-18-24, comfortable, good. It's minimum. It's sort of.
Well, I literally like an 8812 exo can work for an adult urodactylide, and like if you send them home in an 18 or 12-12-18, like that's next level. Like, you don't worry at all. They're going to be so happy. A well planted 12-12-18 is going to be phenomenal for them. So so being able to go up to an 18-18-24, which is not even that big a tank, and have that be paradise is like, holy crap, right? You can go pick it up off the shelf at any pet store and provide an ideal home. So hopefully they pick up. I think in the pet trade, you're seeing it more and more. But again, if you're looking up your first reptile, it's worthwhile taking a bit more time. And if you're a breeder, it's worthwhile telling people, like, these are the other options that you should be looking at as well.
Agreed. 100% agreed. Do you have any other other suggestions? Alternatives for crested geckos?
With crested geckos, it's funny because I had a customer the other day who went from a crested to a garg. And started wanting a crested, and then I just kind of talked about the different personalities. That's a wonderful thing about new cow species, is that there's a bunch of them. Like, there's a bunch of them, and they all basically eat the same thing and have, different types of humidity, but can use planted tanks and bioactive and yada, yada, yada. So again, I think gargle geckos you're starting to see more in pet stores now. Chewies you're starting to see more. Leechies again. Like, I think it's important when someone comes in, as opposed to just saying crested gecko, maybe saying new cow species, right?
Yeah.
Species, and these are the options. And I'm happy to start seeing the other options popping up in pet stores in the hopes that people can understand the difference. I used to hate garg geckos. I did not like them. I was anti-gargle gecko. And then I started getting into them and understanding the difference in them. They're a bit more prehistoric. Cerasonoriums. Like, the ceras are next level. Like, I've had some fascinating conversations with different breeders who are just starting to get the ceras out there. And like, this is like, they remind me of the cat geckos, actually. Like, they're so prehistoric. They're so, they're just, everything's premeditated when they're going. Sleek. That's the word. They're sleek. They're elegant. They're
elegant.
We always, the little joke in the hobby is that all crested geckos share one brain cell.
Yeah.
And so the more there are, the brain cells being spread out, whereas like ceras, they all have their full set of brain cells. Like, they are thinking all the time, but they're still new cow species. They still eat crested gecko diet. They, they still can go in a bioactive setup, but it's just something that we should be letting people know about, and that people should be researching to go, wait a second, I want a new cow. I know that, but maybe I want a garg. Maybe I want a chewy. Maybe I want a Sarah. Maybe I want a leechy, which is another reason, or a Yuri, which is another reason why I breed them all. Cause I like offering all of these animals that don't have to live on bugs all the time, but there's different options.
You're giving people the option.
Yeah. I think it's important. What, do you have another option as opposed to?
I don't. I think you what's that saying? You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I think that urodactylides or chameleon geckos, whatever, probably the best replacement. As all reptile keepers, I like my big reptiles. I like I like all that, but I think, and we said this multiple times on this episode, I think the keeping, like, I save the keeping of the big reptiles for when you have the room and when you have the facility, and like hopefully, you know, maybe like zoo setting kind of thing. If you're in an apartment and you don't have the space, and again, shout out Billy Sven, keep what you're able to keep. Don't keep what you want to keep if you're not able to provide.
Yeah.
Right, keep what you're able to keep, and a species that interests you also, not just what you're being told to being told to keep on the internet.
And I think another side of that is, and I think it almost fits into our next, what we're about to go into, don't get a species because it is what is most recommended that needs a giant setup, because there's other species that need a giant setup that are better. Like,
yeah,
why commit to 15 years of a 4-foot tank to something like a leopard gecko, or an 8-foot tank to a ball python, when 8 years from now, 10 years from now, as you go into this hobby, there's other species you're going to know about that you're actually going to want that setup for, which to me is the chameleon. And to me, that just made me immediately think of the average customer coming in to the pet store going, I want a chameleon. Like, it's constant. It's all the time people asking for chameleons.
That's funny. So like, do you have a recommendation for the chameleon, or do you want me to take this one?
Well, I think first I would like to touch on why people want the chameleon. Because I think the chameleon is something like, it's like, I think it's even more of a...
It's like iguana or chameleon. Those are the two reptiles that people who aren't in the reptile industry know. Yeah. Those are the two names you know. And chameleon, the colors change.
Before they searched my first reptile, they knew iguana and they knew chameleon. They didn't necessarily know the word ball python or leopard gecko, but they knew iguana and they knew chameleon. So what you get is, for the people coming in going, I want a chameleon, these are the people who haven't even Googled yet. These are the people who just came in and go, I want a reptile. And then they're asking for the chameleon. And again, chameleons are beautiful. There are some incredible things happening with chameleons in the industry right now. Some of the custom setups that are being made, some of the custom misting and drip systems, the advancements in diet. It's absolutely staggering to 20 years ago, where the average chameleon lived a year or two, and that was that. But the average chameleon is next level, like next level care. And they're not necessarily friendly. They're not necessarily something you can ignore for 12 hours, let alone 24 hours. Most chameleons that you would get in the market to get quite big need a massive enclosure, not glass enclosure, typically a screen enclosure. Like, we were just talking about a level of care for what you get out of the animal, not fitting what the average person who walks in saying chameleon or iguana actually wants. So the flip side of that is, what do they actually want? And for me, I would say emerald tree skinks, from what I personally have experience with. I think emerald tree skinks give you the ability to have the plants, to have the color, to have the interaction. But I think something that to me fits it much closer than the emerald tree skinks.
So yes, so I'm going to touch on a couple of things before I say it. I'm going to keep building suspense here on this episode. I like this. So first of all, I want to say that I think chameleons are absolutely awesome. I'm going to keep giving out these disclaimers too. They're actually one of my favorite species of reptiles. I would love to keep some one day. They're so prehistoric looking. They're awesome. Those hands, the colors, the eyes, everything. But I agree, they're 100% not for a beginner keeper. They're definitely for the more advanced keeper, someone that can understand. Someone can understand the different parameters.
Who I respect so much, who when I talk to them about chameleons go, oh God, let me tell you my stories of how I've learned how to keep chameleons. It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, 100%. Yeah. And on the topic of them coming in not doing the research, it's funny because you can tell from the way they phrase their sentence and who has done their research. So a lot of people will come in and say, I want a chameleon, not knowing what a chameleon is, what it looks like. I've even had people point at a crested gecko and say, I want that chameleon. Like, it really is, it's scary to see sometimes. But then you also have the people that really do know what they want. So people come in and be like, I'm looking for a veiled chameleon, I'm looking for a panther, blah, blah, blah. And those are the people that a lot of them are going to be the perfect chameleon keeper.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are also have done their research and just based on what they've read online think they can and maybe can't. And realistically, you're never going to know until you try, right? You may be the perfect chameleon keeper, you may
No,
not be.
and you should respect that as well. If it's something
Mhm.
you think you want to try and you're ready to try, absolutely, like go for it.
Exactly.
But the average person saying chameleon, that's not what they actually want. I would say 99% of them, that's not what they want.
I think you're right on that.
And they often get towards a crested gecko, I find, is where we take them. They say chameleon and then you say crested gecko. And because they're so like unsure of what they want, actually, they're easily convinced on the crested gecko. But I don't necessarily think that's actually what they're thinking when they say chameleon.
Yeah, they're looking for something else. And what they're looking for, and I'm being completely biased here, and I love emerald tree skunks
I agree
too.
with you.
I love them, but I think the closest replica, and I don't think that these are beginner pets either, to be honest. But I think that they're more manageable for beginner keepers and easier to learn, and the stepping stones towards chameleons. And I think I've built enough tension on what I'm about to say right now, but most of the people already know mountain horn dragons. They are awesome. They come in all different sizes. So just like chameleons, how you have the smaller species. Yeah, oh yeah, they so many different sizes. So the Acansoria lepidogaster is probably like still bigger than what's the small? I think so carpet chameleons are still going to be a little bit smaller than Acansoria lepidogaster, but they're generally almost around the same size. Definitely the same size setup because chameleons need it pretty big, and so do mountain horn dragons.
You said it.
What?
You were building up, and you hadn't said mountain horn dragons yet.
Oh no, I did already.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did. Yeah. I said mountain horn dragons. Yes. And I've said the species. Yeah. I've said the species multiple times. Yeah. So you said earlier as well, like screen versus glass enclosures.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are doing chameleons in glass enclosures now because again, it takes the right care and the right husbandry to be able to do it. And mountain horn dragons is the same thing. So at first people were saying you have to do screen, you have to do greenhouses, you have to do all that. I'm keeping all of mine in planted, naturalistic. See, I didn't use bioactive there. Planted, naturalistic vivariums, glass vivariums. It's the same as chameleons. So it's the trade-off between humidity and airflow. You need that high humidity, but you also need good airflow. So with fans and with the right misting schedule and all that, it can definitely be done. And they're great eaters, which something we hear about with chameleons. They're great eaters. They're super docile. So almost all of mine, except for one of my females, I can just reach in, pick up, and they're sitting on my shoulder for hours, no complaints. And I even put them as a great bearded dragon replacement too. The only difference is that they're not arid. So if you're looking for that arid, but like a lot of people when they're looking for bearded dragons, they're looking for that pet that they can have out on the couch sitting with them for hours, right? Yeah. And bearded dragons need heat. So eventually too long is too long, whereas mountain horn dragons are room temperature in general. They do need a hotspot, a very low hotspot, and they're frankly mine are barely ever using it. So I can have them out in room temperature for a very long time, and I can talk about mountain horn dragons for hours, but I really think they're a great chameleon replacement.
They have the kind of the spiky too, right?
Yes, they look prehistoric too. Like
there's something about them, and even like in their eyes, the way they're looking at you, it reminds me a bit of a chameleon. Like
agreed, it's the bulginess that can they can't go separate like a chameleon, but they can go all the way. Like it's pretty cool to see. The downside though is that they're very very hard to find.
Yeah,
and most of the ones that you are finding are wild caught. I'm hoping I know a few people that now are building up colonies, myself included, and hopefully in a couple of years there will be like a lot of people working with them, and especially now that it's not just Acansoria capra in the trade. Now that there's many, and it always has been, but they were a little bit rare recently. A lot more of the subspecies started coming in, so people are starting to hopefully work with them, and eventually they will be available as captive bred healthy animals. But as wild caught, they're generally a little finicky.
And it's the same thing, like I keep emerald swifts, which I love.
Yes.
But again, it's really hard to recommend them to people because they're wild caught. Like, I'm starting and other people are starting to produce captive bred specimens, but it's really hard to recommend something that the average person is not going to be able to go and get captive bred. But I really think that's about to change with mountain horn dragons. I think it's enough people have their interest piqued, you included, and I think people, it's like with the emerald tree skinks, people are realizing what the captive bred means. And then the breeders are listening to that and making sure to build up the wild caught populations that are healthy to produce the captive bred.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Within like I've had my babies for like a year over just over a year now, year and a bit, and the first 6 months, it seemed like anyone I showed them to had no idea what a mountain horn dragon was. They wasn't asking, and then the last 3-4 months, I'm getting more frequent messages asking if I have any available or asking questions about them or seeing where to get them or that kind of thing. So and that's just the thing with a lot of these species. Eventually their popularity builds up and then it dies down. It's all trends, but it's interesting.
I remember like 2 years ago you were saying like I'm ready to work with my next species.
Yes.
And I said mountain horn
Yes.
dragon.
Yes.
Because like I had never worked with them myself, but every time I'd seen anybody on Instagram posting about them or watch any, and there's not a lot of videos back then out about them, I was like, something about this species is really cool. Like,
yes, they're awesome.
This is something, and you confirmed it because you bought them all.
Yes,
But
I did. I'm slowly training the Canadian population of their mountain horn dragons. They're all gonna come live with me.
The monopoly is now with Daffysreptiles. I'm
Yes.
thrilled about because I want to recommend them, and that's the thing as breeders, like. We want people working with these species. This is not about like, I want to be the one doing this. Like, no, we want the demand to be there. It helps all of us. And it helps reptile keeping. It helps, it helps everything. It helps the younger generation getting into this.
It's not a competition.
No, exactly. And if I get my 9-year-old a ball python she doesn't care about in a year versus if I get her a snake that's going to help create a love for this hobby, like that's what we're thinking about in this. And so it's not a competition. It's everything 100%. In this hobby is about building the industry and building the hobby and about making sure the right animals, that's what this episode is about, right? Making sure the right animals are what people are buying so that they love it, so that, more people discover the hobby.
100% agree. It's the hobby versus everybody else, not the hobby versus the hobby. And I just wish more people would understand that.
Yeah. Keep 100%. Saying it.
Yes, 100%. But, maybe people listen to me. Anyway.
I want to just come off of those guys quickly. I had mentioned emerald tree skinks earlier.
Yes, sorry, yes.
So I think it's interesting because we went from chameleon and monitor, kind of the two things I'm thinking of here.
Yes.
Which are not in any way related. No one walks says I want to monitor. But it's interesting how I think for a lot of people when they're thinking chameleon personality, they might actually be thinking monitor personality, that kind of like really smart, really interactive. So I think that's why I said emerald tree skink. But another kind of option for a chameleon or kind of related to an emerald tree skink, we were just talking about this earlier. I say the common name, the keel-bellied lizard.
Now I can't even say it anymore. Gasteropholis praesina. I probably said that wrong now too under the last second thing, but yes, 100%.
That's another one that I think we should be recommending for people coming in asking for these really, and like you said, the person who may actually have already done the research, not necessarily just the person coming in saying chameleon because that's what every reptile is to them. Like, that means lizard to them. But like the people who come in asking because they actually have done some research and want something that's a bit more, next level. I think that's another thing we should be recommending. And they are now available captive bred, aren't they?
They are coming in, yeah. So Exotic Addicts in Montreal has a beautiful breeding colony, and they've been putting out babies for a couple of years now. I would say I 100% agree with you. I'm going to try to say it again just so, so green kale-bellied lizards and Gasteropholis praesina. I think I said it a little bit better that time. I put them and emerald tree skinks, like you said. Those are, I think, easier monitors. And even the ones that Mike's working with, Mike Taitula, the Tachydromus genus, also like mini monitors. Those three species I put in mini monitors closer than to chameleons, but all species that I wish more people would be working with.
Just a bit more advanced. Like again, and I'm not saying that for your first reptile you have to go something really simple. Like again, you're investing in something for 15 years, and if you don't necessarily intend to have a whole collection of things one day, like it's okay to be a normal person who doesn't have a room like this. That's okay too. Yeah. But like, so I understand that for some of these people who come in, and I've sold emerald tree skinks to people who are buying their first reptile and plan on this being it, and just have done enough research to know I don't want it to be a crested gecko. I don't want it to be a leopard gecko. I want it to be something a bit more advanced, something more interactive, that has, a few more elements to it than just throw crickets in once a week. And And I think that's fine too. I don't think that we are saying there's class. I hate advanced, expert. Like, I don't like that either. I think it's really, where is your research at? How much time do you have? Like you said, keeping the animal that you can provide for, not necessarily just the animal you want. Because, we all want a pet llama, but that
yeah, why not? Or a Komodo dragon or something.
Or a Komodo dragon.
Yeah.
I would love to keep a big monitor. I don't, even with the space I have, I don't have the option for that. So that's why I like keeping the emerald tree.
Or the climate here.
Yeah. And that's the thing with iguanas, right? Like, iguanas are incredible. If you live in Florida, they're also really easy to keep.
And
Some of the outdoor enclosures that people have in Florida for things like even chameleons in Florida are so much easier because you have the humidity already built into your environment. But for here, having these other options, hopefully more available in the market, seeing things like the keel belly, seeing things like the emerald tree skinks maybe start to pop up in stores would be great. A side point of that too is the skinks in general.
Yes.
Skinks in general.
Schneider's skinks, what are they called? The ocellateds, the fire skinks, all very cool. Yeah.
Like, I think skinks in general, and the funny thing about skinks they've been in the hobby forever. Like, they go back, like because they're so hardy, right? They're one of the first things that and that's another thing with them, is because they were so easy to get wild caught. There weren't really captive bred populations being curated. It's been wild caught, because it's cheap and easy. Same with like emerald swifts. Whereas now, as we're realizing, captive bred give you the looks of the wild caught with the personality of a really laid back reptile. We're starting to see people invest in the wild caught, and as wild caught gets harder to get, because
I was gonna say, and now it's getting a lot harder to get. A lot of animals aren't able to bring in anymore.
Yeah, and so now, and I think those two things are working together in a good way to produce to help push breeders to work with these species. And then as they work with them, and then they push them to the public gets introduced to them and goes, wow, this is really freaking cool. And so all of a sudden you're seeing ocellated skinks showing up, and you're seeing fire skinks again, and you're seeing like all these, there's so many species of skinks. Even
the smaller species, like when I was working with the bronze grass skinks, they were awesome. So much personality in such a small animal.
Yeah, and really, I mean, I don't want to speak for all skink species, but realistically, like even blue tongue skinks, right? Again, big enclosure, but overall care tends to be a couple levels down from a similar sized animal of another species. Like, they're much hardier. And again, I don't want to say just to survive and not thrive, but it's even with the larger skinks, it's a bit easier, I find, overall to take care of them versus something that's more of a monitor species or, other lizards. So yeah, skinks. I think we're going to see more and more species of skinks being pushed. I think for a lot of people, like, again, we didn't say it earlier with leopard geckos, but I think a fire skink or a Schneider skink is something also
a good replacement. Yeah,
for leopard gecko. Like, and again, like, you just don't see them in the average pet store, and they're not even expensive. Even the captive bred ones now, I don't find are that expensive.
Right.
But they're just not enough people are working with them, and not enough people are recommending them, so the demand's not there.
Not enough awareness on them yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Are we gonna move on to frog talk now? I have a frog hat already. Hold on.
You did. Here it comes. Here it comes.
I'm ready.
I did say I wanted to talk about frogs. You dressed for the occasion.
I dressed for the occasion.
Bashed leopard geckos.
I had to change for the leopard gecko bashing because it was frog related. But now that we're back in frog talk.
Now we're back on frogs. So I have talked to you about this before.
Yes.
I love frogs. Like, I really do love frogs. I've kept so many different species of frogs over the years. I started with whites when I was like 12 and moved on from there. I love tree frogs. They're really cool. They're not easy. No. They're not easy. Tree frogs are not easy. And it's funny because we were talking earlier. I want you to re-say what you were saying before we started rolling. And I was like, wait, see that one's for taking.
Yeah, the tree frogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a group of tree frogs, and you told me not to. And I got them, and so the thing about tree frogs is that most of them are nocturnal, and you clean the enclosure during the day, and you don't see any frogs, and then you go to sleep and you wake up all nocturnal animals are like this, right? You can see them if you want to. You stay up overnight and see them. But my problem with the tree frogs is that you don't see them, and then you wake up with poop all over the glass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just sort of like a repeat cycle, and you just it becomes more of like a chore than an actual like love for the frogs, and they're awesome, and I'm sure there's a better way of keeping them than how I was doing it, but
you should.
No, of course
tree
not.
frogs, the idea is like, oh, but they're handleable. Well,
no, they're not.
You didn't.
I agree.
You shouldn't.
I agree.
So to me, that's the only real push on tree frogs over where I'm gonna go in a second.
Yeah, I don't think any frogs are handleable.
No, like people are like, you should get tree frogs as your first frog because they're handleable. No frogs are handleable. They have permeable skin. It's not good. You have to glove up, and realistically, it's stressful for them.
Even with gloves, exactly. Yeah.
With gloves, and again, I mean, proof of that. I love fringe leaf frogs, and my saga of trying to get them in, and my first imports a couple of years ago, and now I have some great groups, and I love them to death. But they are work. You live in fear. You live in fear of
all the time
prolapse, and you live in fear of bloat, and you live in fear of bacterial infection, and like that's just a part of even people I know keep whites. Like it's like instantly, like you see a blotch on their skin, and you're like, oh my god, do they have a bacterial infection? Do they have like you go back and forth between trying to keep the tank naturalistic and then sterile to avoid So again, tree frogs are great. There's an incredible species out there, but when someone comes in looking for their first frog, I don't think it should be tree frogs. And what I'm about to say is probably incredibly controversial and might fly in the face of everything we've been told over the last 20 years. I honestly think the easiest frog in the hobby to keep, while also keeping in mind interest in like visual appearance, is a dart frog. It's a dart frog. Like,
you already know I don't disagree with that. And it comes down to how good is your husbandry, right?
Yeah, and I don't even think it's just how good is your husbandry. How easy is it to get husbandry set up that it's self-sufficient, that it can be good without that daily cleaning that goes? It's really hard to keep tree frogs bioactive. It's really hard. Yeah. Like you can do it, but it's really hard. They produce too much poop. They're too hard on the plants in the setup.
You have to go in and clean the water bowl daily.
The water bowl daily. There go my dart frogs. They're prone to having different bacterial issues and prolapse. And are they your frogs going?
My frogs going.
My species. Yeah. They're prone to different issues. So whereas dart frogs, you set up it's more money up front. You really have to invest in a really good setup. Really, make sure you do the right base layers and you're bioactive. But I literally have bioactive setups. Like my Terrabellus have been there for 3 years now. And like, it just gets better and better. Like literally a couple times a week, I throw in fruit food, and I don't even because they need such high humidity. Again, we were talking about how sometimes lower humidity is easier to keep, and then higher humidity is easier to keep. It's a medium humidity that is harder to keep. Yeah. Dart frogs can go up to 100% humidity. So it's not hard. You have glass tops on it, and it just maintains humidity. You spray it, you have your mist king go off once a day. I'm never worried about humidity in my dart frog enclosures. Do you keep track of your humidity in your dart frog enclosures?
I don't know. I don't. But but like visually you can tell that they're humid enough.
Easier. It is easier 100%. To look into that enclosure and see
with a little caveat or disclaimer there. As we said earlier, humid, not wet.
Yes, humid, not wet. Exactly. You're right. You gotta be careful. Yes. But I can look in there and I can see it's humid. I know it's okay. I don't think about that. Whereas, with other species, I'm still measuring sometimes. It's a bit harder to eyeball what 60% is or what 58% is or 50% is versus what 99% is. And I think another thing with dart frogs is they're less prolapse than in other tree frog species. Tree frogs in particular are very prone to prolapse. And one of the reasons is diet. It's really hard to reproduce what a tree frog eats in the wild. It ain't crickets.
No, definitely not crickets. No,
it ain't crickets. And you go to the pet store and you buy crickets, and a cricket can be like this, or a cricket can be like this. You can order 1/4-inch crickets, and they can come in 1/4-inch, or they can come in pinhead, or they can come in 1/2 inch. There's no set standard at the end of the day because they're crickets. They're not measuring each one. Whereas with dart frogs, people get so freaked out because fruit flies. Ooh, fruit flies are gross. Fruit flies are self-contained.
Yeah, they're easy. Yeah.
They're easy. They're in a little container, and
it gets tiring when you have lots and lots and lots of them. But just for somebody keeping one group of dart frogs, it's easy.
2 cultures at a time, and you switch them out every couple of weeks. And you can buy them pre-made at the pet store, and then you put on your shelf. And realistically, what live food other than worms you can put in the fridge, like we were saying earlier, can you just leave on your shelf, and it's feedable day after day after day? You don't have to add anything to it. You don't have to maintain it. When it's done blooming, and you replace it with the next one. Like, and yes, the flies do get out. 100% the flies do get out, but they are flightless. They fall on the ground and then they die. And if you have dart frogs, you do know that you are vacuuming up flies around your dart frog enclosures. But if you get an animal that eats crickets, you've got crickets in your house.
Yeah, they don't get too far either, the fruit flies compared to crickets.
No, whereas when crickets die, they stink. Like if you've got a dead cricket in the room, or if it gets out and you listen to it for 3 weeks before the little sucker dies, like
yeah, that's true too.
Like people get so hung up on the fruit flies, and realistically, I think fruit flies are the easiest feeder. They're easiest feeder to culture. You can make your own fruit flies for $1 a culture. Breeding crickets, I've done it. It's no fun. I order my crickets every week because there's no way I'm going to breed crickets. Like, and I use a lot of crickets, and it's not worth the trouble. Whereas fruit flies, I make all my own cultures. It's so cheap and easy. So I really think, and again, I spoke about this on the last episode, like when I first got into the hobby, and like dart frogs, wow, it was like this, like, oh my God, how are these real? And then we've gotten into this whole elitist attitude of, oh, that's a really advanced species. You are not ready for that. You're not ready for any frog if you're not ready for
You're not doing your research.
Yeah, if you're not ready for dart frogs, you're not ready for any frog. There is no other frog to me. I mean, Pac-Mans, but even Pac-Mans, like, they get neglected so often, and I don't think they're cared for.
They're another one of those species that are hardy enough to survive neglect, so people think they're doing well.
And I've read care sheets that say, 4 to 5 years lifespan on a Pac-Man. I'm like, well, I wonder if it was actually cared for, what they can do, right? So to me, if you're not ready for a dart frog, you're not ready for a frog, realistically. And overall, keeping many different species of frogs, my dart frogs are the lowest maintenance, visually appealing, the most beautiful. And different species are harder than others, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm sure you keep some, like I keep mostly the easy species because I don't breed them. But
I'm not keeping so I would say if you were to consider harder species, like things like Ufaga would probably be harder than a general species. I'm not keeping anything that tough either. But I think the biggest thing, the best thing about them is actually they're diurnal.
Yes.
They're awake during the day. They're around all the time. Whereas and the calls, of course, the calls are beautiful calls. All of them are very diverse and beautiful, and they're like little bird calls. But
you're been off, and I'm like, those aren't mine. I don't recognize that sound. But.
Yeah, this is a different call. Oh, that's one of the games I used to play. There was a point where I went crazy with dart frogs, and I was buying just a bunch of different dart frogs. Don't impulse buy frogs. You'll end up regretting it in the long run. Okay, you'll be over, and it's not even the frogs that are a problem. It's you will get tired of making fruit flies. That's why I said when you have too many, it's annoying. I have a manageable amount now, and it's I love it again. But when it becomes too much and you're constantly making fruit flies,
I stopped breeding. Culturing springtails for me was not.
And that too, springtails. When you're breeding frogs, you have a lot of tadpoles, a lot of froglets, and you need a lot of springtails. But that being said, the thing that I loved the most, and the reason I was doing it, was because every frog had a different call, and I wanted my basement to sound like a jungle. And it still does, as you can see. Like, it's still, to a certain extent. But they're out during the day. They're colorful. They're like they come right out when you feed them, which is that's when we interact with our animals, when we're feeding them, and they come right out when we're feeding them. So I agree with you. I think dart frogs are awesome.
And there's different species of dart frogs. So there's some that my bumblebees live in a group.
Yeah. There's communal and
now there's 6. So apparently they made a baby. Only one, but anyway, but there's other ones like kinks and stuff you typically keep in pairs, and there's bigger ones or smaller ones. So again, it's like I think it's hard because they're complicated. So you also don't want to say for your first reptile get a dart frog. But if you are saying for my first reptile, I want a frog, you are making a statement that you probably don't realize is complicated to begin with. Like it's a lot of research to get a frog. Even the simple frogs that they tell you are easy, they're not. So if you're going to invest in a frog, you're going to invest all that time, money, and effort. Why not invest in something where the food source is easier and the daily care, to me, is actually easier. It's easier to maintain 100% humidity or 90% humidity than it is to maintain 65% like a white tree frog would need with dry out periods and this and that. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful. Like,
see, like I'm biased, but I agree. I think they're the best frogs, but again, I'm biased.
I just want the industry to stop telling people dart frogs are hard.
Me too.
I don't want to make them available at every pet store where they're selling them to the way they sell leopard gecko. I would like the industry to catch up in terms of what they need and just make people set them up properly. But I just don't want to have
people they're impossible.
Stop telling people they're impossible. They're really, really not. There's a lot of breeders raising them in tubs. No problem. I've done it. Like, it's literally the hardest part of raising dart frogs is the food source. The hardest part of keeping dart frogs is just remembering this is so easy. And it only takes me 5 minutes to make fruit flies, but I forgot because it's too easy. and then having to wear the hat. That's the other thing too.
You have to. If you're a dart frog keeper, you have to wear a hat.
And you have to wear the hat, and
you have to wear the frog hat. I had to bend it up a little bit because I couldn't see.
You could see.
I was like, it's getting dark down here. So for everyone listening, if you're going to get a new reptile, obviously do your research, but consider your options. Do your research on a list of animals, maybe even make lists of pros and cons, figure out the right species for you. And again, look at the options because there's a lot of things out there beyond that top 10 list.
Yeah. And I'd love to see more YouTubers do the alternatives to the top 10. I know that the content, people love the top 10 content, but I think we need to take responsibility in the industry too and say, listen, I'm going to play on that because what people want. And then I'm also going to educate them.
100%. And I think we brought a lot of value to some of those species today. Hopefully people, like I said, just look into them, and beyond what we said, there's so many species that are great pets, great reptiles that, we haven't even mentioned or that we may not even know about this. Exactly.
We've decided. Yeah.
So do your research and go look for the right reptile for you.
And breeders need to reach out and do more species too. Breeders, it's our job as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, don't fixate on. Fixate on a species. Just don't fixate on a species that you know what. Never mind. Scrap that. Screw it. Okay, awesome. So Jen, can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, JayhayJay. You can find me there. And I'm very happy to answer questions. You can see all my animals and see what I do.
Yes, and as usual, this is Jen's third time. I think.
Yeah.
Yes, third or fourth. I think it was third time on here, and of course you're going to be seeing her many, many more times. We have a lot of episodes planned, as we said before. We're just spacing them out a little bit,
We're busy.
So, yeah, exactly. Can't be recording every day here.
No.
But no, yeah, it's awesome. So go give Jen a follow. Thank you, Jen, once again for doing this. So it was a lot of fun as always. Yes, and with my frog hat, I am Daffy's Reptiles. Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.